Hello friends, welcome to the software world. I'm Candost. Here I'm on a mission to make connections between the software industry and our individual and unique lives. We all have a common goal of solving problems with software. Whatever happens on our journeys will not stay mysterious anymore. In this episode, I had a talk with Dennis Benkert. Dennis is an engineering manager at Jimdo. And he worked as a software architect before and also as a lead developer and also software engineer. As we can say that he was in a different positions in his career. And he has also a podcast called YAMP. And he's doing the podcast with Jim Allen. And they're talking about how they're managing and navigating in the software engineering world. And you will hear us talking about the podcast in the beginning, but later on, when we move to our topic for today, which is prioritization for software engineers and especially senior and staff engineers, you will hear us talking about the responsibilities of the senior and staff engineers, and as well as how they approach the work. And all of that comes to the point when you change your role from junior to senior and then go beyond to staff and principal engineer level, then you face different challenges. And in that case, the prioritization becomes very important because you are in many different roles and you are maybe in a company doing many different things at the same time. And you will hear us talking about the strategies, how a software engineer can prioritize the work when there's a change in the roles and becomes more experienced. And through the end, you will hear us talking about the benefits of prioritization. And also at the end, Dennis gave his 3 recommendations, strategies for how to prioritize the work or how to make prioritization skills better. And I gave mine. And I really enjoyed this talk, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Hi, Dennis. Welcome.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad that you're here, and because I listen your podcast, and one thing I really liked about your podcast is your podcast is called YAMP, right? What does it stand for actually?
Oh, that's a funny story because like even Jim and I were not decided anymore like what it exactly means. I think we settled on yet another management podcast, but
Okay.
we're undecided nowadays. So we actually just call it Yamp because it
Okay.
just sounds nice. And we're old guys that are coming from yet another whatever
Yeah.
from this era and yeah.
Yeah, the thing I really liked actually is that you are recording in a very limited time. I think in your lunch breaks, right? If I remember from your podcast correctly.
Exactly, that's the format that we chose because we at one point in time we just like had these conversations where we talked about basically everything that was going on and called it our sense making sessions.
Mhm.
And then we decided, well, actually that might be interesting to people to talk about this. And then we said, well, when's the time when you usually do that? I mean, we could do it in the evenings. For sure. But then we said, well, lunch is great because it's a short break. You are limited anyway, so you will focus on only the essence of things that you want to talk about, and that's like how we settled for it.
That's the thing I liked actually because I'm doing in the evenings usually, and having like creating a setup and everything, aligning people's time and day is always a more problem when you do it in the evenings because everyone has life and everyone has different life priorities, let's say.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's the thing I like, and I really recommend everyone listening us to also go to the description of this podcast, and you will find the link to Dennis and Jim's podcast as well. And today our topic is actually the software engineers, more related to software engineers and senior software engineers, especially. We will talk about prioritization and what is going to change or what is changing for senior roles when it comes to the prioritization. And I want to start actually defining what does prioritization mean, because I think that we are neglecting this one a lot, and we are not understanding correctly how we define the prioritization. What do you think about that, Dennis?
Prioritization. I mean, it's a good question because like prioritization can mean really a lot of things to a lot of people. In this context, I would say what it means to me is um, learning how to deal with all the influences that you get from the point on that you basically are going to be asked to have more influence as an engineer. And it comes with a lot of freedom, but this freedom is the thing that a lot of us, when we're engineers, are not really prepared for. That can have a lot of influences if it's like your team structure or your company structure, how much influence you have. And that is a skill that you need to learn at one point in time because um, questions for your time and for your attention will just gonna get more. And I'm reaching ahead a bit too much, but this is like how I define it in that context, so to say.
That's I think that's a good definition, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Is for me the prioritization is basically something like as a skill that you learn on the go by seeing what is working or not when you try to do something and asking right questions to understand the context and to see what is more important or critical and what you can accomplish at the end,
Hmm.
and then defining basic the task, choosing the task accordingly. And that I think this is nice, but I'm really glad that you opened the door already for the next topics. And right now, when I think back, my junior software engineer position to coming to now, I realized that I never directly focused on this. So I never maybe try to improve as a skill of prioritization. And I'm more curious about how people approach to this. Like, what was your experience how did you realize, for example, that is an important topic for you?
I think for me it came late because for me it became ultimately important when I became an engineering manager and I started managing other people. And like usually what happens then also is that you get a lot of more responsibilities that you're basically tasked now to do. And then I mean, as a senior engineer or as an engineer, I never had these official titles, so to say, as
Yeah.
it is super prominent nowadays. Um, it was easier at that point in time because like I didn't have I didn't work in those like let's say big teams that had so
Hmm.
many responsibilities that a team lead would tell me, hey, can you take over these tasks from me, for example, or let's say a senior engineer would delegate something to me in the sense of
Hmm.
you're now responsible for this. And you're also, by the way, responsible for planning it and that it happens and that, that it doesn't fall through the cracks, basically. And how I recognized it was basically my calendar was overflowing. Um, my task list didn't work anymore. I was a big fan at that point in time um, of using to-do lists, and like
Hmm.
they were just getting longer and longer. And it's not that the tools didn't work anymore, but like I wasn't really able to recognize, oh, actually those are symptoms of something that I'm not capable of doing. And like that's
Yeah.
how I basically got into it.
That's, I think that's a good. It's good that you were able to see that. And when I realized that I never use the to-do list, but I'm more of a person like in a Trello style or the
Hmm.
columns, using columns, something like to do in progress and done style person. And I realized that when my to do part column was also getting bigger as well. But I want to go to actually defining the general expectations from software engineers, because before differentiating about the prioritization and which one uh, the senior software engineers should focus on, I want to start a bit define what is the general expectations, like overall from software engineers from junior to senior, but not specifying the levels. And I know that you're an engineering manager, so from that perspective, what would you expect from a software engineer?
Hmm. I think for me, it's a gradual shift, so to say, from how much freedom you get. Coming back to like this notion of like there's more freedom, and therefore you will have to work on prioritization. Let's imagine you just start out with your job, or you just came out of a boot camp, for example, and you get like your first opportunities to work in a company. What usually will happen is you will either have a team lead or you will have a senior engineer who's basically mentoring you, and they will oftentimes decide on the tasks that you get. They will slice them for you, and as you progress, right,
Mhm.
you get more and more freedom, so to say, to slice tasks yourself. And as you progress, let's say to a mid level, it's going to be easy, for example, or it's going to be um, the let's say the breaks are going to be released a little bit more, and you're tasked, for example, to break down, let's say, a whole story, a whole epic, so to say, into the small tasks. You're going to be tasked to also bring this to completion, maybe within, let's say you're running with sprints. If we have that you're going to be asked to just do that. And so for me, the progression really is oftentimes like you're growing technically, yes, that is
Mhm.
definitely a given, but also there, from an engineering management perspective, there's also all these other things that I want to teach you, because they're ultimately important besides all the software engineering stuff, to manage your work, to slice it down, because it's kind of a preparation, so to say, for what will come as you get more experience.
I think that's nice to touch the epics and stories. Now I'm thinking again, the uh, my previous experiences. I think that was the part that is improving more about this prioritization skills, because when you're project manager or engineering manager or your team lead, whoever it is, comes to you and says, "Look, Candost, just can you take care of this?" And then doesn't matter what it is. If it is not a small task, if it is a something that requires the full story or an epic, then you start thinking about, okay, this is something big than I have worked before, bigger than I have worked before. And how can I split this? And where can I start? I think asking the question, where can I start, actually shifts the mind a little bit. Because then you need to see, actually, like which parts are more important than the others.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you have a good mentor, they will also guide you through that, and in a sense that they will give you some tasks that are going to be a stretch for you already. On the other hand, they will also ask you some questions like, how would you do that? Like, how would you split that up? Is that like, imagine all the tasks that you do. And I mean, we can like, if in that already, it's a bit like planning, project planning, and you can go with things like getting things done, for example, right? Like imagining the goal,
Mhm.
splitting it down in really small tasks, and like the smallest achievable things. And depends really on the person, but sometimes you often talk about, if you're when you're reflecting about it, like what is maybe something that like makes you procrastinate about stuff. And then it's also about the in priority, and that stage, I would say, is also often about what is the thing that I should start first, so that I get the big things out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
before I go further with the other stuff, like what is the most important thing about this feature, for example, that I should get finished first before we do the other things, and that could be, I mean, fixing some styling issues is
Mm-hmm.
maybe not the most important stuff to fix right at the beginning, but if you get the feature right with all the test coverage and everything, cool. Afterwards, you can work on the design, for example. So that's like your first endeavor, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
I would think about prioritization basically, and that is very limited. If we go back into again like how much freedom you have, it's limited in the sense of you can't do much wrong here, which is a good thing for you because you have kind of a test bed when you're not super experienced.
Yeah.
But you still already get the freedom to decide yourself how you're doing things. And if you have a good mentor, they will correct you about it, or they will nudge you, or they will push you into a direction maybe, and then you figure it out yourself. Because that's something that you said before that I liked a lot, which is oftentimes you have to figure out yourself how prioritization works. And sounds like typical management typical managementese,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some truth in it that you can read all the books in the world about this stuff.
Yeah.
You just have to go through it sometimes.
Yeah, true, true. And also, like while you're going through, that's like one of the other things I think I did was just watch and learn.
Hmm.
There is no one way for anything, and even if, as you said, you read all the books, then when it comes to the practicing it, what we have learned, I've seen that watch and learn also works as well.
Yes, and I would say it's mostly because of how the situation is that you're in.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
it depends on a lot of factors when you're at that stage, for example, or when you're in a smaller context. Let's say your team is using Scrum or your team is using Kanban. Your team is using nothing of all of this. Maybe could also be, um,
Hmm.
and then it really depends like how you do things based on the situation that you're in. That's also something that is like important about this. That's why there's also not always not like a one fits all solution, I would say.
Yeah, and I think when you like become more experienced, it's it's becoming less and less these kind of watch and learn situations, and also the risks are getting higher, and then you have less chances to do this learning. Maybe sometimes you have, yes, but not all the time, and that's what I want to a bit talk about. When you gain more experience, let's say you work you're a mid level engineer, and then you are becoming a senior, and then maybe even going to the staff or principal engineer road, and in that part there's like a fundamental shift over prioritization because your work changes a lot. um, it becomes from focusing on tasks or like directly going to every code base, doing every feature implementation by yourself, and evolves into something that is involving many other people. Even if you are still working in the code level, then your changes impact more than just a feature or the product, but also with other teams, or maybe you have a greater impact on the product than you had before. And I want to understand your perspective actually on what changes when an engineer goes from more mid-level to senior and also even beyond.
I think for me, the let's say the biggest change to be had there is how much you influence
Hmm.
with your change, or how much you influence with what you're doing. Because I like to believe that it's that when you're working in your team and you're a senior, you're like all the changes that you make, and with just some adjacent systems, that's all the change you make, and that's usually all the influence that you have. But as you grow more and go beyond that, even like when you're still a senior, but like let's say you mentioned staff engineers, if your company has that, if you
Hmm.
do that, one of my peers calls that your firepower increases in that sense, which means you're going to be responsible for, let's say, a system or an initiative, which spans across your team. So what you usually will do is you worked in your team, and now you will immediately work outside of your team, which brings a lot of new things, a lot of new situations with you, from ranging from for the first time you have to work with a couple of engineers that you never worked with before, maybe, or only seldomly, and you just like saw
Hmm.
them in a couple of meetings, or you saw them in an all hands meeting, and now let's say you're responsible for doing an API change, in like the general setup that you have, or you're introducing a new standard, um, and or you're doing a big refactoring that will span across
Hmm.
multiple services, and which a couple other teams are maintaining. Now you have to do some talking with them. You have to win them over. You have to do some negotiation, maybe, and therefore your chances to fail are actually getting higher. On the other hand, you get more, let's say, this firepower, and I think that's um, the biggest change, so to say, because like you are not only acting anymore in only the circle of your team, but you're acting more outside of that. Still, you will have things that are still going on in your team, and people will ask you about it, because it's not a binary shift, so to say, where you're usually going to be asked, well, no, you're not working in that team anymore. You're only going to work outside of the team. What's actually going to happen is that you're jumping, or that you're in a team for a specific time, or working with a couple of teams for a specific time, and then you're switching over maybe to a couple of other teams when you're a staff engineer, for example. And um, that means you won't have all the time to have like full context, for example, for everything all the time, which is definitely a shift.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have all the information, so like we need to kind of accept that
Hmm.
in the beginning, because it's impossible to know everything. And to me, it's more like when an engineer becomes more senior and staff level, they become kind of a face of the team to other teams as well. I see that still, like the staff engineering levels, especially, goes to like other engineering teams and also like implement features which is used in many different teams and work in initiatives and etc. But often they still have a team, and at least that's what I've seen,
Hmm.
not only in Jimdo, in my current company, in our current company, but also in other companies as well. They have the team, but they become the face of the team, and that's like whenever something happens, or whenever some input is required from the team, they also become the go-to person in these kind of engineering levels, at least.
Hmm. I see them sometimes as representatives, so to say.
Hmm.
Let's say you have a staff engineer that is distributed between a couple of teams, a group, for example.
Hmm.
Then they become like the representative of these things. And now we come back to, you cannot know everything. You will have an overview, of a technical overview, basically, of the the systems that are there,
Hmm.
the architecture from a systems perspective, from a software perspective, and you're you're watching it from a broader scale. So you're not only you're not only the face, so to say, from the outside, but from the inside. What a couple of engineers might do is also, they tell you something about a change that they want to do. You heard something similar happening in Team B, so you can be the connector to them, and you also manage that, so to say, that conversation, so that you can align the technical changes all the time, because that's also oftentimes what happens between teams, that, like, I mean, we also cannot talk with each other all the time about every change that we
Yeah.
do, and that's also something that I would add on what you said, which is totally in line with what I think. That's yes, that's what the staff engineers are actually.
Yeah, and like when we come back to the prioritization, actually, and it becomes more and more important. Actually, if you climb the career ladder, and in these cases, I have seen, or I'm also struggling sometimes, which task should come first, because like evaluating the tasks or like the work and etc, it becomes harder because then you have an impact and you want to have a more impact in the company or your work or your department, doesn't matter. And then you see, at least that's what's happening me, for example, when I see that I have an impact on multiple teams, and then seeing that, okay, which one has a better impact, choosing one of them is hard. And now I'm curious, what do you think about what might be the good strategy in these situations? Like, how can people actually prioritize when they become more a representative of the team?
Hmm. It's not uncommon. It's also like I wouldn't even say that it's necessarily a thing that happens with staff engineers. It's also
Of course.
things that I've seen with the senior engineers. But absolutely, it's
Yeah, I'm not a staff engineer, so yeah,
even I think even if you were, the debate is absolutely right that we need to have about this because um let's put it like that. What you just described is really that, like you're in that situation where you have multiple tasks at the same time and you have to decide, okay, let's say, do I take care of this refactoring now that we want to do of the API, or do I take care of updating, for example, the the hiring profiles that my
hmm,
engineering manager asked me about? And I like this example right now because it's super technical on the one hand. The other one is
yeah,
super process and people related. Which one is more important? And there's no. The funny thing is, there's no final answer where I could just tell you now. Okay, this is
of
it.
course. Of
And
course, yeah,
I think the single most important thing for me here to solve this is you will learn, or as you grow, you learn pretty quickly about stakeholder management. And that is, like, for me, it's vitally important to have that and to also teach that to engineers when they progress, because like when you get more experienced, you won't only be working together with me. You will also work together with, let's say, one of my peers who's also an
hmm,
engineering manager. And you might also work together with a director of engineering or a VP of engineering because they ask you something that they will also
yeah,
want to have done, right? And
yeah.
then it's classical stakeholder management where you have to talk more. That's definitely something that you have to do with, let's say, your engineering manager about, like, hey, this is the other thing. This is like I'm also tasked to do this thing about the hiring profiles, and you also asked me to do this thing um, about the APIs. So I think this is more important for me, and this is also more important because it brings, for example, us as a company forward more. Let's say
Hmm.
you can put a focus on, um, this is good for the customer. Do we need to ship this customer value now, or like do we need to improve this because it will unblock teams and then teams are going to be faster, or do we need to focus on these hiring profiles now because maybe in your company at that point in time hiring is a high focus because we might have a quarterly goal, for example, that says that we
Hmm.
need to hire X percentage or increase the amount of engineers by X percent. So once you get into these conversations and talk with your stakeholders about like what are the things that you have on your plate, and you start relating that to, I have this overview of what is going on in the company, and this is what I perceive to be the priorities for the company. Is this actually right, manager? How I assess the situation, and when you have that conversation, it's oftentimes a lot easier to make the call yourself.
One thing I learned actually, um, during this, at least a learning, which one has a better impact or greater impact in my work, was learning how to say no. That's
Hmm.
that's the part where I struggle the most, because when someone asks me and I want to help them, that's one thing. Um, and I know that they value my opinion. That's why they ask, or they value my input. That's why they're approaching me, and I want to help them. But saying no is, or learning how to say no is incredibly tough. At least it was for me. Now I'm getting a little bit better, but not there yet fully. And I'm curious about your thoughts, like how people can say no actually, because that's part of the prioritization. You need to say no to someone to do the most important work.
I think it's. I want to take a step back for this for a
Sure.
second because it is definitely true. I mean, most of the times you said this, like you want to help people, and that's, by the way, most of the time when people, why people like come to you, because like you want to be helpful, so you are helpful, and therefore people are going to reach out to you about these things. Um, so to come to like saying no, yes, absolutely. I sometimes don't like, sometimes that's too easy for me to just tell people it's only about saying no, because it's a pretty hard decision to say no. And it feels hard in my opinion, because oftentimes we are not sure about what is really also important for us, and how to assess multiple options, because we if you go with, I don't know if you've read the book, which one was it, Greg McKeown, Essentialism, that was the book.
Hmm.
In Essentialism he talks about the fact that when you look at priorities and tasks from an essentialist standpoint, you're actually assessing what options, like what are all the options that are there, and you're gonna pick the one option or the couple options that like give you that bring you forward the most, so to say, or that make the most progress. And that for me is a thought that works. It might not be always the right thing to set to use, like to always say what's the thing that brings us forward the most, because that comes from a standpoint where it's easy for you to always like make the decision. If you have a VP of engineering asking you something, it's like, if or
Yeah.
a boss, right? It's usually harder to say
Yes.
no.
True.
Um, but let's go with the other majority of tasks where you are actually in charge to make the decision. And there, I totally get it, where you can see, or where you can say, um, which of these tasks are going to like get me forward in progress, so to say, of a project that I'm currently working on. And if you find that, and if you take that time to find that task out, to find out which of this task that is, it's usually a lot easier to say no, because you made an assessment basically. And that's something um, that took quite a while for me when I changed, for example, to like becoming an engineering manager, to do that, to sit down and to take a look at the tasks that I had, because often, like, I came from a world where I had my lists and everything, and like every time I could go through my list and I looked at it and said,
Hmm.
"Oh, these are these 10 tasks. Yeah, cool. These are super important." And it took it took me time, and one of the situations where like really was overwhelmed, that I reached out to one of my mentors, and she said, okay, we're gonna do the following now. For you prepare all the tasks that you have on a whiteboard. Like, you bring stickies, we put them on a whiteboard. We just sit in a room, and you're gonna put them there, all of them. Bring all of them. If it's 100 stickies, I don't care. And then we sat down together and took the time to, like, I don't remember if I just said 1 hour or not, but I think it was an hour. Um, where we just like went through it. Is it important? Is it not important? And then she told me afterwards did you ever, or she asked me afterwards, did you ever do this? Like, did you ever sit down and assess the situation for a moment, or did you always hustle through this? And that was interesting to me because saying no, like everybody tells you, you got to learn to say no more. But
Yeah.
it's so hard to say no if you don't know what is important to you from these tasks, and if you don't sit down and assess the situation for a second or for 5 minutes, for example,
Yeah.
um, it's it's definitely harder. And I think that's one thing that is super important for me.
Yeah, I mean that's like the evaluation of tasks is something I sometimes I miss, but I think I use right now the personal Kanban, which is helping me a lot actually on that one because now I can quickly see what am I gonna do tomorrow, for example, because that's what I do. I have a column called tomorrow, I have a column called today, and at the end of my day, I just say, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna do these kind of tasks, and then just move the tasks to the tomorrow column. Um, this is kind of an assessment or evaluation, saying that okay, is this important or not?
Hmm.
So I want to come to point that the talk about the benefits actually. Um, since we are getting all these tasks, we are learning how to say no, we are improving and evaluating the tasks and continuing further. But benefits often we are overlooking them. And I want to like a bit define what are the actual benefits that we are gonna gain, not only of course I mean we are improving in our career, that's obvious one, we are maybe moving further with the in the ladder, that's also like the obvious one too, but I want to understand the real benefits, like specifically as a person, as an engineer, which I'm gonna gain when I'm better prioritizing my work.
Hmm. I think I'm gonna steal very heavy now from Cal Newport, who is the guy that wrote Deep Work. Um, and I think our job is very creative. Like we basically, if you go with Peter Thiel, we build things from 0 to 1,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes. So really, out of nothing, we create something, and it's a really creative and draining process for the brain, and it needs your brain power. Like you cannot just like, I don't buy in if like if somebody tells you, we I just need the perfect ticket on with like everything written down in the user story,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can just like hack down whatever is in there. It's like, still this is not the case. That's why we have agile teams. You will
Yeah.
have to have a conversation. You learn about the task that you want to do. You need to scope it down, right? And this is cognitive work. That is really hard work for your brain to do all this sense making all the time, and to distill it down to, okay, what is it actually that I need to transform now
Yeah.
into code, right? And now I did a lot of build up for what I want to say is, this stuff requires time. Like, you need time to think about this. You need time to, like, you cannot do this in 30 minutes usually. But what's going to happen is, when you progress more and when you get more responsibilities, is your day most probably will look like, will break up into smaller chunks, basically. So you get, like, when you're not actively working with your calendar, for example, and you just like rock and roll, you just like look at your calendar morning, oh cool, what's coming up, then you very often will end up with a calendar that looks like a level of breakout. So you have 30-minute blocks basically everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have like full blocks of time where you can just concentrate and do something. And prioritization is key here for me, because if you know what things to do and what things not to do, you can make more decisions on your own. And when you prioritize and organize more, like, from yourself, you can you can plan and structure your day around that, to have these blocks. Because this, let's say, works for, you implement a story, but let's say you're then asked by your your tech lead, I need your input here for the next tech strategy that we're working on. This is also something that requires a lot of your creative energy, and sometimes it's even work that you need to do spread over a couple of days because I mean you and I we've been there. You cannot write a tech strategy run down usually in one day or in one afternoon.
No,
You need
impossible.
some time to like sit there. Sometimes you need some time to just watch out, like look out of the window and think about it, contemplate, is this really something that's going to work? And that's also like making this work a priority is really something that's going to be helpful for you if you learn how to do that, because as you progress more, this will give you more freedom. Otherwise you're going to end in a situation where you get a lot of stress usually because your other people are deciding about your time, how you use your time, if you don't learn how to balance that. And that can it's sad to see because like you see a lot of bright people that are not able to do that, and then for me it's just I'm sad when I see this because I want to help them, and um it's wasted opportunity, so to say, for them. And I'm super happy when they make the breakthrough about this usually.
The calendar is pretty interesting. I think like the it comes down to the point where I think it was Paul Graham was the post that Paul Graham wrote about maker versus manager schedule,
Hmm.
and it applies to the senior or staff engineers as well. I think even though they are not managing, their priorities or like their calendar is changing, time management. And I think I also did like have the same struggle. And when I realized that okay, now this is not working, then I said okay, let's see, because I like Cal Newport actually in a way that he defines this deep work. And I when I read the book, I said okay, yeah, this is something I miss a lot lately. And how can I do that? Because when you become more senior engineer or and in staff level, as we talked before, you talk with more with people, then you are interrupted more, and that becomes a mess if you don't control it. And sometimes you need to think, as you said, do nothing but just think and to see like what you should improve. And couple things that I think you do, but I'm not sure. I tried only once, but I'm willing to try it again. Going to deep walks. I think you mentioned before, right? If I remember correctly, not in the podcast, but in our in the in maybe in the company talk. I'm not remember. I'm not sure
Hmm.
if was it you or not.
I think I did, like one of my peers, Luca, does it, and he basically reminded me about it again. And I started with it also because of one of Newport's books, which I think
Hmm.
was Digital Minimalism, where he has it very prominently in.
Hmm.
Um, and it helps. By the way, I also did this in a couple of one-on-ones back when the pandemic started, which is sometimes it can be very refreshing if you're just walking outside because you see change of scenery all the time.
Yeah.
And one-on-ones tend to get way more relaxed when you do it, and it I wouldn't do it every time, but sometimes it can freshen up the situation. When you're in a one-on-one and you feel like you're stuck, for example, in in a in a structure that feels super boring, that's a
Hmm.
super great way to spice it up a little. And I would even do that even if we're like all working together in an office again, or like if you have the chance to just like do walking meetings. I mean, Jobs was super famous for doing that with all of his peers, and I think there's a refreshing sense in that. To talk about like deep walks, yes, that's sometimes very helpful. What I do, and I also copied that, which for me is a nice thing, is I write down one question basically that I wanna think about during that time, and I don't put headphones in or anything. I don't put music on. I just start working, have this one question, and I think about like a solution for that. And that could be, let's say we have a problem in like a performance problem in something, or like I'm thinking about, okay, how can we maybe come up with a program for training engineers that can be helpful for them, for all of us. That's like stuff that I then think about in one question, and I keep coming back to that. Cal Newport, I think, calls it also deep meditation, because it's a form of, you could say it's a form of active meditation, which is a cool thing because like you're really focused on one thought. You cannot do anything else because your machine is not in front of you.
Yeah.
That's like one distractor less, so to say, and the only thing you have is your own thought, basically. And whenever I realize something, I just scribble it down on sheets of paper that I have with me. And when I come back, I have usually a couple ideas about these things. And yeah, the first times are strange. I have to say that because
Yeah,
you're
true.
not used to it.
Yeah, yes, that's what I experienced. Like when I went to a walk, it's like I said, okay, I have this idea, and I don't have my, I like put my phone to airplane mode, and I don't have anything else digital, just a pen and paper. And then I said, okay, this feels strange actually, but I think I like the idea, and I tried once, but I'm absolutely willing to try it again to see for these deep walks as you described in the same way,
Mhm.
nothing in a different way. Um, I want to actually, yeah, we are coming to an end slowly, and I want
Mhm.
to get your maybe top three recommendations for senior engineers, or senior and staff, like whoever is like going forward in their career, how they can improve their prioritization, or maybe points that they should actually focus on or take care. Is there anything that comes to your mind?
Mhm. Top three. Let's think. Ha, what a what a segue. um, I would say the most important for me is really block time in your calendar, to think. If you can think better in the morning, some people can think better in the evening. I'm definitely a morning person. Do that. Block time in your calendar, so that people can very hardly block over it. And maybe even without your computer, don't open Slack, anything, just like take topics and think about them. Second one for me would would definitely be visualize on a regular basis what are currently your priorities that you have, like your, let's say, big priorities, not like what do I have to do today, but rather sit down. It could be in one of the sessions that I said, like of like priority one. So in one of your thinking sessions, maybe once a week, or once a month, just sit down, sheet of paper, write down all the top priorities that you currently are working on, all the things that your boss asks you about, the cross team initiatives that you are, and just get an overview. Because when you get an overview, you can start looking at it and say, whoa, that's maybe a lot. Or you can say,
Mhm.
oh, actually, it's two things. That's quite good. No, like, nice. Maybe I can ask for more, that I can do. Because if you have this overview, great. Because now you have it in front of you. It's, you basically converted something that was in your head and you couldn't really tell what it was into something that you can see and touch, which is like, we're like, although we all like to work with digital machines, we are still human beings that, like, with like all our history of millions of years, like things that we can touch and see. So as soon as you write it down, it becomes real for you. um so that would be the second one. Now I have to think about a good third one. It's clarify, clarify, clarify. It's a little bit like the Beetlejuice thing, but it's really, whenever you're unsure about, let's say you made your plan here about your, like, all your overview, and you're undecided. Oh, is this thing, like, I want to scratch this, this work on the API docs, for example, that I don't really think is important, but I'm asked to do it. Um, that you like clarify what is the priority of this. Is this maybe super important now, or can this maybe be done afterwards? Because that's something that also happens a lot of times, that you think all of this is super urgent, and then you talk once with one of your peers that asked you about something, or you talk with one of your bosses about these priorities that are coming from them, and most of the time there's a chance that you can scratch a lot of these things because you just perceive them to be urgent, but actually other side doesn't really perceive them as urgent, and they can just wait for it. And so it's easier for you to then say, oh, actually, from these 10 things that I had here, two are really urgent. The other ones can actually wait for a month. So great. Now you have focus and you can like work on these two, which is a cool thing. So I would say these three: make time, visualize all the things that are currently going on, and clarify.
I think those are like three great points. And I want to add mine, maybe one or
Sure.
two.
Oh, I'm super excited about your ones.
I would say first, like I like the idea about the thinking actually from yours, like think about the priorities, and I like to think while I'm writing, and that will be my recommendation because I believe that it helps a lot. At least it helps to me, so that's the point. My recommendation, and thinking through writing is actually a great strategy that I follow, and I saw the many great benefits about that one. Second one this is a very small trick I use or I started using recently, and it works like a magic. And whenever someone asks me about something, I just answer them directly. When do you need it? Basically, like until when you need this thing to get done, and then it works magically because then it forces the other side to think it through and see, okay, maybe that's not really urgent because sometimes as we forget when or how we should do some certain things, we ask other people directly, go immediately and act like it's really high priority. Others do that too. So just I think it comes with your clarify point, but it's more like a small hack, I would say. Whenever someone gives me a request, I ask directly, until when do you need this thing to get done? So, like, these are 2 points that I can say. And one last thing about saying no. And I'm thinking these thing in these days, so I'm not like it's kind of a good mind exercise, let's say. I think it's better to say no to good things as well, to be able to say yes to the great things, actually. That's like at the end goal. It's not something that is directly applicable, but I'm thinking this one a lot. And then now recently, I'm considering the things or the tasks that I get. Is this a great thing or is this a good thing? Or is this a like normal regular thing? Then I can also like try to prioritize accordingly. Yeah, that would be my, I think, three top recommendations.
Nice. I like three was super inspiring. I like it. I'm gonna steal it, I think. It's a nice filter. You just described a filter, in my opinion, and that's great because um, it's something that I was talking about before. I think, if I remember correctly, where it really was, if you find out like what is an important thing that gets you for moving forward,
Yeah.
I would totally connect it to what you said in point three, which is really like if you're able to tell this is a great thing to do, or this is like a
Mhm.
great task that like has a lot of benefit for me, for my team, for my boss, for the company, great. You just made a good decision, I would say. And two was cool. Two was cool because it was basically a direct application of something that I just described on a high level. So
Yeah.
um, I would definitely say whenever you think about like these things also that you read about prioritization, like think about how can I make this happen? How what can be a strategy or what can be a small habit that I can just do in order to make this a real thing? Because what you just did in two was exactly that. And if and then we come back to creativity, right?
Yeah.
Because it's your situation, you will come up with the best things that work for you. That's now I'm making the really closing loop here. You said in one that writing that thinking through writing helps you.
Yes.
It doesn't help me, for example. I cannot do it, but
Hmm.
great. You found for you a habit that helps you like to do prioritization through like writing it down because that's how you process things. Nice.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like we can close it with like saying that do what works for you. So there is no one way, of course. And like I think all software engineering topics ends with saying it depends, and or saying that it's up to the situation. So we can here also say that do what works for you at the end. Yeah, thanks a lot, Dennis. I really enjoyed our talk. And this is one of the really, I would say, cool talks that I had, which I never thought about before deciding the topic. So I really appreciate having this, or maybe nudging me to think through, like about the prioritization and then seeing the history of mine, checking it again, and helping me on the journey. I really liked it. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Cool, and thanks for having me. It was definitely one of the situations where we just like could like touch so many things, and I
Yeah.
really like how you do the format, honestly, because like you touch a lot of things. We can talk about stuff in a deep form, which is cool. And yeah, I also like I have this thing that I do with that I say oftentimes. I really enjoy doing these conversations because it's sense making to me as well. So I learn a ton of all of this as well if we talk about it. So although I might sound sometimes maybe like a preacher when I talk about this stuff, I'm also thinking while I'm talking, and I have scribbled down a lot of things here right now. Um, on in front of myself, and boom, I have learnings. That's great. So thank you for making me learn.
Thank you. I have also many notes, new notes here as well. Thanks a lot. If you liked this episode, please follow the show and share the episode with one of your friends, colleagues, or family members who might find it interesting. Until next time, take care.